When Sophia Blake opened the cabin door to find Demon Steele Lawson bleeding on her porch, she knew her carefully constructed refuge had just become a battlefield. The president of the Montana Hells Angels stood swaying in the doorframe, his leather jacket torn and stained with blood, his piercing gray eyes holding a mixture of pain and determination that made her breath catch. She'd fled to this remote mountain cabin to escape one dangerous man. She hadn't expected fate to deliver another one directly to her doorstep. Sophia had been hiding in the Montana wilderness for 3 weeks, trying to disappear from the nightmare that her life had become. After months of psychological torment from her ex-fiancé, a wealthy businessman who'd used his connections and resources to make her feel like prey being stalked by an invisible predator, she'd finally gathered the courage to vanish completely. The cabin belonged to her late grandmother, tucked away in a valley so remote that GPS couldn't find it, and cell towers were just a distant dream. It was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place where Richard Blackwood's money and influence couldn't reach her, where his private investigators couldn't track her movements, where his accidental encounters and psychological games couldn't slowly drive her insane. She'd changed her phone number, closed her bank accounts, and told everyone she was taking an extended vacation. In reality, she was fighting for her sanity and possibly her life. If you love forbidden love stories, subscribe and don't miss the next one. The cabin sat like a forgotten dream against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, its log walls weathered to a silver gray that blended perfectly with the surrounding wilderness. Built in the 1960s by her grandfather as a hunting lodge, it had everything she needed to survive off the grid. A wood-burning stove, a well that provided clean water, solar panels that her uncle had installed 5 years ago, and a pantry stocked with enough canned goods to last through winter. Sophia had spent 3 weeks learning to chop wood without destroying her manicured hands, to start fires that actually produced heat instead of just smoke, and to find peace in the kind of silence that only existed miles from civilization. She'd been healing, slowly rebuilding the confidence that Richard had systematically stripped away with his mind games and emotional manipulation. She'd thought she was safe. She'd thought she was alone. She'd thought wrong. But looking at Demon Lawson's face in the flickering light of her oil lamp, all sharp angles and contained violence, softened only by eyes that held more pain than any man should carry, Sophia realized that maybe being alone wasn't the same thing as being safe. And maybe the most dangerous thing about this particular man wasn't the Hells Angels patch on his back, or the weapons he undoubtedly carried. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was something worth protecting, even when he was the one who needed saving. The gunshots had echoed through the mountain valley like thunder, shattering Sophia's peaceful evening and sending every survival instinct she'd developed into high alert. She'd been sitting by the fire, reading a romance novel that felt ironic given her current situation, when the sound of violence came rolling across the wilderness like a promise of chaos. Sophia had killed the oil lamps immediately and moved away from the windows, her heart pounding with a fear that had nothing to do with whatever was happening out there and everything to do with the possibility that Richard had found her. For 3 weeks, she'd been free of that constant hypervigilance, the exhausting need to check over her shoulder and analyze every shadow for threats. Now it all came flooding back in an instant. The silence that followed the gunshots was worse than the noise. Sophia pressed herself against the cabin wall, trying to become invisible while her mind raced through possibilities. Hunters didn't shoot at night. Drug dealers. This remote area was perfect for illegal operations. Or worse, Richard's people, finally tracking her down to her grandmother's forgotten refuge. When the motorcycle engine cut through the darkness, Sophia's blood turned to ice. Richard rode motorcycles. Expensive ones, usually, but he had connections to all kinds of people. She'd learned during their toxic relationship that his legitimate business interests were far more complicated than they appeared, that his wealth came from sources that didn't bear close examination. The engine noise grew closer, then stopped somewhere near her cabin. Sophia crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains, expecting to see Richard's perfectly styled appearance and cold smile. Instead, she saw something far more dangerous. The man who climbed off the Harley-Davidson moved like a predator, despite the obvious pain in his movements. Even in the darkness, Sophia could see that he was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the kind of leather jacket that meant serious business. When he stepped into the pool of moonlight near her porch, she caught a glimpse of patches on his back that made her stomach clench with recognition. Hells Angels, Montana chapter. And unless she was mistaken, the elaborate patches marked him as their president. Sophia had grown up in Montana. She knew what Hells Angels meant. Violence, territory wars, the kind of men who solved problems with bullets and intimidation. This was exactly the kind of danger she'd been trying to escape, just with different packaging. But when he collapsed against her porch railing, she could see the blood spreading across his jacket. "Shit," Sophia whispered, torn between self-preservation and the nursing instincts that had made her become a pediatric nurse before Richard convinced her to quit her job and depend on him for everything. The man straightened with visible effort and knocked on her door. Not pounding or demanding entry, just 3 measured knocks that somehow conveyed both strength and courtesy. "I know you're in there," he said, his voice carrying through the wooden door with surprising gentleness. "I can see the smoke from your chimney and the tire tracks in your drive. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need help." Sophia pressed her back against the door, her mind racing. This could be a trap. Richard was smart enough to hire someone convincing, someone who could play the wounded warrior to gain her sympathy and access to her sanctuary. But something about the voice didn't fit. There was pain in it, yes, but also a kind of straightforward honesty that Richard had never possessed, and the blood she'd seen hadn't looked fake. "Go away," she called through the door. "There's nothing for you here." "Ma'am, I've been shot. My bike's leaking oil and I'm about 10 miles from bleeding out. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to help someone who's run out of options." The practical part of Sophia's brain cataloged the medical implications of what he was saying. Gunshot wounds in the wilderness were often fatal without immediate intervention. If he was telling the truth, he could die on her porch while she debated whether or not to open the door. "How do I know you're really hurt? How do I know this isn't some kind of trick?" There was a pause, then the sound of leather against wood. When Sophia peered through the peephole, she saw him leaning heavily against her doorframe, his face pale in the moonlight. "Because if I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have knocked." The simple logic of it cut through her paranoia. Richard would have knocked. He was too civilized for breaking and entering. Richard would have brought flowers and apologies and explanations for how he'd found her. Richard would have tried to manipulate her emotions and make her feel guilty for running away. This man was offering nothing but honesty and the reality of his own vulnerability. Sophia unlocked the door and opened it slowly, keeping the chain engaged. Through the gap, she could see him clearly for the first time. Demon Lawson was nothing like Richard Blackwood. Where Richard was polished and perfectly groomed, this man looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves, all rough edges and natural strength. His dark hair was longer than fashionable. His face bore the kind of scars that came from a lifetime of physical confrontations, and his gray eyes held depths that suggested he'd seen more of the world's darkness than most people could imagine. But there was no calculation in those eyes. No manipulation or hidden agenda, just exhaustion and pain and the kind of desperate honesty that couldn't be faked. "Please," he said simply. Sophia unhooked the chain and stepped back to let him enter. Demon Lawson crossed her threshold and immediately made her small cabin feel even smaller. He moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, but Sophia could see the effort it cost him. When he finally allowed himself to sink into her grandmother's old recliner, she could hear his sharp intake of breath. "Thank you," he said, looking up at her with those storm-gray eyes. "I know this wasn't an easy choice." "You're bleeding on my grandmother's furniture," Sophia observed, already moving toward her medical supplies. 3 weeks of isolation hadn't dulled her nursing instincts. "Sorry about that. I'll replace it." "With what?" "Do Hells Angels Presidents shop at antique stores?" Despite the pain etched across his features, Demon smiled. It transformed his entire face, revealing a warmth and humor that the leather jacket and intimidating patches had hidden. "You'd be surprised what we do in our spare time." As Sophia gathered supplies to treat his wound, she realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. This dangerous stranger had brought violence to her doorstep, but somehow he'd also brought something else. He'd brought a sense of safety she hadn't felt since before Richard Blackwood had turned her life into a psychological nightmare. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd run from one dangerous man straight into the arms of another. But looking at Demon Lawson's honest face and straightforward manner, Sophia began to suspect that not all dangerous men were created equal. Some of them, apparently, still knew how to knock. Dawn broke over the Montana mountains while Sophia finished stitching the bullet wound in Demon's shoulder. Her fingers steady despite the fact that she'd been up all night playing battlefield medic to a Hells Angels President in her grandmother's kitchen. "You're good at this," Demon observed, watching her work with an intensity that should have made her nervous. Instead, Sophia found his attention oddly comforting. He was focused on her competence, not cataloging her weaknesses the way Richard always had. "I'm a pediatric nurse. Was a pediatric nurse." Sophia secured the final stitch with practiced efficiency. "Though I have to say, you're significantly less cooperative than most of my patients. Most of your patients probably weren't trying to stay conscious long enough to make sure they weren't bleeding to death in a stranger's chair. A fair point." Sophia stepped back to examine her work. The wound was clean and properly closed, though he'd need antibiotics and rest to avoid infection. "This needs to stay dry for at least 48 hours. No writing, no fighting, no whatever it is Hells Angels presidents do for excitement." Demon's smile was rueful. "What we do for excitement is apparently get shot by rival gangs and impose on beautiful women who just want to be left alone." The compliment caught Sophia off guard. Richard had called her beautiful constantly, but always in a way that felt like possession, like he was cataloging an asset he owned. Demon said it like he was simply stating an observable fact, with no expectation or demand attached. "Who shot you?" Sophia asked, settling into the chair across from him with a cup of coffee. She'd made a full pot, partly because they both needed the caffeine, partly because normal activities helped her process the surreal situation of treating a wounded outlaw in her kitchen. "The Reapers, rival club from Wyoming." Demon accepted the coffee she offered with a nod of thanks. "They've been pushing into our territory, trying to take over some of our business interests." Business interests. Nothing that would shock a nurse. "We run security for businesses that banks won't touch, provide protection services, handle transportation for companies that need discretion." Demon's gray eyes met hers steadily. "I'm not saying we're choir boys, but we're not the monsters people think we are either." Sophia studied his face, looking for the lies and manipulation she'd become expert at detecting. Richard had been a master of presenting selective truths, of making his control and abuse sound like protection and love. But Demon's explanation felt different. Honest about what he wasn't saying rather than deceptive about what he was. "So, you're like organized crime with better publicity?" Demon laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger than his apparent 38 years. "More like disorganized crime with very bad publicity, though we prefer alternative business structure. Despite everything, the blood, the weapons, the leather jacket with its death's head logo, Sophia found herself relaxing. There was something fundamentally decent about Demon Lawson that no amount of intimidating imagery could disguise. "How did you end up here?" she asked. "This place isn't exactly on any main roads. I was heading for a safe house about 20 miles north when they caught up with me. Had to take some back roads to lose them, and when I got hit..." Demon gestured at his bandaged shoulder. "Your cabin was the first sign of civilization I found." "Lucky me. Lucky both of us, I think." Demon's expression grew more serious. "Though I should warn you, they might come looking." The Reapers aren't known for giving up easy. Fear spiked through Sophia's chest, but it was a different kind of fear than what she'd lived with for months. This was immediate and specific rather than the constant grinding anxiety that Richard had cultivated. Somehow that made it easier to handle. How long before they might show up? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. Depends how badly they want to finish what they started. Sophia considered this information while watching Demon drink his coffee. He held the cup with both hands, and she could see the slight tremor that indicated blood loss and exhaustion. Whatever else he was genuinely hurt and genuinely grateful for her help. "There's a root cellar," she said finally. "Stone walls, separate entrance. If someone comes looking, you could hide there until they move on." "And put you in danger?" "No." The immediate rejection surprised her. Richard would have hidden behind her without hesitation, would have found ways to make his problems her responsibility while maintaining plausible deniability. "I'm already in danger just by helping you," Sophia pointed out. "Might as well commit to the plan." "Why are you helping me?" Demon asked suddenly. Most people see the patches and decide they'd rather not get involved. Sophia set down her coffee cup, trying to put her thoughts into words. "Because you knocked. Because you bled on my porch instead of breaking down my door. Because you said please. That's it? That's more than you might think." Sophia met his eyes. "I've been around men who take what they want and justify it later. You're not one of them." Something shifted in Demon's expression, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude. "You're hiding from someone." It wasn't a question. Sophia felt her carefully constructed walls rising, the automatic defenses that had kept her sane during the worst of Richard's psychological campaigns. Everyone's hiding from something. True. But not everyone hides in abandoned cabins 50 miles from nowhere. Demon leaned forward slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Someone hurt you." "Someone's trying to hurt you right now," Sophia countered. "I'd say we're even." "Fair enough." Demon settled back in his chair, but his eyes remained gentle and concerned. "For what it's worth, whoever he is, he's an idiot." "How do you know it's a he?" "Because women don't usually drive other women into hiding. Women fight differently." The observation was more perceptive than Sophia expected. Richard had never understood the subtle cruelties he inflicted, had genuinely seemed to believe that psychological manipulation wasn't real abuse, because he'd never raised a hand to her. "He never hit me," she said quietly, then immediately wondered why she was sharing that with a stranger. "There are lots of ways to hurt someone without hitting them." Demon's voice carried the weight of personal experience. "Some of them leave worse scars." Sophia looked at his face, really looked at it, and realized that the scars she could see were probably the least of what he carried. This was a man who understood damage in all its forms. "Why did you become a Hells Angel?" she asked. "Family," Demon said simply. "Not the kind you're born into, the kind you choose. Brothers who'll die for you, who'll never abandon you no matter what mistakes you make." His expression softened. "I was 15 when I met the club. Angry kid with nowhere to go and nothing to lose. They gave me purpose. And now you're their president. Now I'm responsible for keeping that family together, for making sure no one abandons anyone else." Demon met her eyes. "It's not always pretty, but it's real." Sophia understood. She'd been searching for something real ever since she'd escaped Richard's carefully constructed prison of luxury and psychological manipulation. The Hells Angels might be dangerous, but at least their danger was honest. "The man I'm hiding from," she said slowly. "He's the opposite of real. Everything about him is calculated, designed to control and manipulate. He made me feel like I was going crazy. But you got away. I ran away. There's a difference." "No," Demon said firmly. There isn't. Running takes courage. Staying to fight isn't always brave. Sometimes it's just stupid. The validation hit Sophia like a physical blow. For months, she'd questioned her decision to disappear, had wondered if she was being weak or cowardly. Richard had spent so much time convincing her that she was overreacting, that his behavior was normal, that she was lucky to have someone who cared enough to keep track of her every movement. He made me quit my job, she admitted. Said he wanted to take care of me, but really he wanted me dependent on him, cut off from friends, isolated from family. By the time I realized what was happening, you were trapped. Demon's voice carried no judgment, only understanding. Classic abuser playbook. Make the victim believe they can't survive without you. You seem to know a lot about abusers. I've killed a few. The casual statement should have terrified her. Instead, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility of justice. I don't suppose you're taking new clients. Demon's smile was dark and full of promise. Depends. What kind of man are we talking about? The kind with lawyers and connections and enough money to make problems disappear. Ah, Demon nodded. The legal kind of criminal. Those are trickier, but not impossible. I wasn't serious. I was. The simple statement hung between them like a bridge Sophia wasn't sure she was ready to cross. She'd spent so long feeling powerless, so long accepting that Richard's wealth and influence made him untouchable. The idea that someone might actually be willing and able to hold him accountable was almost too tempting to consider. I should check your bandages, she said instead, changing the subject to something safer. But as Demon submitted to her ministrations with surprising grace for such a large man, Sophia found herself thinking about possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. Maybe running away didn't have to be the end of her story. Maybe it was just the beginning. Sophia discovered the truth about Demon Lawson at noon, when Richard Blackwood's private security team surrounded her cabin with military precision. She'd been changing Demon's bandages, enjoying the easy conversation that had developed between them over the past 18 hours, when the sound of multiple vehicles moving through the forest shattered their temporary peace. Demon was on his feet instantly, his injured arm forgotten, as survival instincts took over. How many? Sophia whispered, moving to the window. 4 vehicles. Professional formation. Demon's voice carried the grim authority of a man who'd survived more ambushes than he could count. These aren't the Reapers. Through the gap in her curtains, Sophia saw black SUVs positioning themselves around her property with tactical efficiency. Men in expensive suits and tactical gear emerged, their movements coordinated and purposeful. At the center of it all, stepping out of the lead vehicle like a conquering general, was Richard Blackwood. Oh God. The words escaped Sophia as a broken whisper. He found me. Demon appeared beside her at the window, taking in the scene with professional assessment. That him? Yes. Sophia's hands were shaking as 3 weeks of hard-won peace crumbled around her. How did he find me? I was so careful. Money finds ways. Demon's jaw tightened as he watched Richard direct his men. Satellite imagery, private investigators, federal contacts. If he's got enough resources, nowhere's really hidden. Richard looked exactly as Sophia remembered, impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who'd never heard the word no applied to himself. Even directing what was essentially a paramilitary operation, he maintained the polished facade of a legitimate businessman. Ma'am, Richard's voice carried clearly across the mountain air, amplified by some kind of speaker system. I know you're frightened. I know someone has been filling your head with lies about me. But I'm here now. I'm here to take you home where you belong. Sophia's blood turned to ice. The reasonable tone, the implication that she was confused rather than making rational choices. It was classic Richard, making her the problem while positioning himself as the solution. I'm not going anywhere with you, she called back, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Sweetheart, You're not thinking clearly. You've been isolated out here, probably scared and confused. That's not your fault. Someone has obviously taken advantage of your vulnerable state. Demon's expression darkened as he listened to Richard's manipulation tactics. Son of a bitch. You don't understand, Sophia said quietly. He's not going to just leave. He can't accept that I chose to go. In his mind, I belong to him. No one belongs to anyone. Demon moved away from the window, checking his weapon despite his injured shoulder. How many men you think he brought? Enough. Sophia felt the familiar despair settling over her like fog. He has connections, Demon. Private military contractors, federal agents who owe him favors, lawyers who can make anything legal. Fighting him is like fighting the system itself. I've been fighting the system my whole life. The simple confidence in Demon's voice made Sophia look at him with new eyes. This wasn't just bravado. This was a man who'd spent 20 years outmaneuvering federal agents and rival gangs, who'd built an organization that survived in the spaces between legal and illegal. Sophia! Richard's voice had taken on a harder edge. I can see there's someone in there with you. Some criminal who's been taking advantage of your situation. I want you to know that I don't blame you for this. You're a victim here. Victim, Demon repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. Classic gaslighting. Make you responsible for his actions while claiming to protect you from yourself. He's good at it. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, fighting off the familiar feeling of helplessness that Richard's voice always triggered. He convinced me for 2 years that I was lucky he loved me enough to keep track of everything I did. That's not love, darling. That's ownership. The endearment was different when Demon said it. Warm and respectful rather than possessive. It made Sophia realize how much she'd missed being spoken to like a person rather than a possession. I'm going to count to 10, Richard announced. Then my associates are going to come in and retrieve you. I'd prefer this to be peaceful, but I'm prepared for other options. Other options? Sophia felt her heart rate spike. He's going to have them break down the door. Not if I have anything to say about it. Demon moved to his leather jacket, pulling out a phone that looked more sophisticated than standard consumer models. Danny, it's Steele. I need immediate backup at these coordinates. Sophia watched him rattle off their location with military precision, then listened as he described the tactical situation with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to coordinating armed responses. 20 minutes, Demon said after hanging up. We just need to hold them off for 20 minutes. You called your club? I called my family. Demon checked his weapon again, his movements economical despite his injury. Rule number 1 of the Hells Angels: no brother stands alone. 1! Richard's voice boomed across the clearing. Get to the root cellar, Demon ordered. Stone walls, single entrance. You'll be safer there. What about you? 2. I'm going to remind your ex-fiancé that Montana belongs to the Hells Angels, not entitled rich boys with delusions of ownership. 3. Sophia felt something shift inside her chest. A spark of the defiance that Richard had spent 2 years systematically crushing. No. 4. No? Demon looked at her with surprise. 5. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not letting someone else fight my battles while I cower in a basement. Sophia moved to her grandmother's gun cabinet, retrieving the hunting rifle that had been gathering dust for years. This is my fight. 6. Sophia, you're not trained for this. 7. I'm trained to save lives. Today I'm learning to protect them. Sophia checked the rifle with hands that were steadier than she expected. Besides, you're injured. You need backup. 8. Demon stared at her for a moment, then smiled. The kind of expression that revealed exactly why he'd become president of one of America's most feared motorcycle clubs. Yes, ma'am. 9. Where do you want me? Sophia asked, surprised by her own calm. 10. Kitchen window. Clear sightlines to the vehicles. Demon positioned himself at the front window. Don't shoot unless you have to. But if you have to, I won't miss. Sophia settled into position, her nursing training automatically adjusting for stability and breath control. Demon? Yeah? The sound of boots on her porch announced that Richard's men were done talking. Thank you for not telling me to hide. Thank you for not hiding. The front door exploded inward with professional efficiency, and Sophia's quiet cabin became a war zone. But for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't running from the violence. She was standing her ground. And she wasn't standing alone. The first man through Sophia's door moved like a professional soldier, weapon raised and ready for resistance. He wasn't expecting to find the president of the Montana Hells Angels waiting behind her grandmother's overturned dining table, and the surprise cost him everything. Demon's shot dropped the intruder before he could announce himself. And suddenly, Sophia's peaceful cabin became a tactical battlefield. More men poured through the door, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit, while others took positions around the building's perimeter. Professional contractors, Demon called out over the sound of splintering wood. Your boy doesn't mess around. Sophia kept her rifle trained on the kitchen window, watching for movement among Richard's vehicles. The whole situation felt surreal, like watching herself in a movie where elementary school teachers had shootouts with private armies. But the adrenaline coursing through her system felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. Sophia. Richard's voice carried across the chaos, amplified by his speaker system. Stop this madness. You're making everything worse for yourself. Even in the middle of a gunfight, he was gaslighting her, making her responsible for his decision to bring an armed assault team to her hiding place. The psychological manipulation that had once paralyzed her with self-doubt now just made her angry. I'm making it worse, she shouted back, squeezing off a round that shattered the windshield of his lead SUV. You brought a private army to kidnap me. I brought security to protect you from the criminal who's obviously holding you hostage. Sophia could hear the genuine confusion in Richard's voice. In his mind, she was still his possession, still incapable of making decisions that didn't align with his desires. The idea that she might choose danger over his protection genuinely didn't compute. He's not holding me hostage, you psychotic control freak. I'm here because I want to be. A rifle bullet splintered the window frame inches from her head, forcing Sophia to duck behind the kitchen island. Through the chaos, she could hear Demon coordinating their defense with military efficiency, his voice calm and professional despite the blood seeping through his bandages. East window. 3 tangos moving to flank, he called out. You got eyes on the vehicles? 2 guards by the lead SUV, 1 sniper in the tree line, Sophia responded, surprised by how easily the tactical language came to her. Years of nursing in emergency situations had apparently prepared her for chaos better than she'd realized. Good eyes. Demon appeared beside her, reloading his weapon with practiced speed. How you holding up? Better than I expected. Sophia checked her ammunition, trying to remember everything her grandfather had taught her about hunting rifles. How long until your backup arrives? 15 minutes, maybe less. Demon winced as movement pulled at his stitches. Question is whether we can hold them off that long. The answer came in the form of something heavy hitting the cabin's roof, a muffled impact that made both of them look up with sudden alarm. Breaching charge, Demon said grimly. They're going to blow the roof. Can they do that? Isn't that illegal? Sweetheart, we're way past legal. Demon grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back of the cabin. Root cellar now. But you said... I said you didn't have to hide. I didn't say you had to die stupidly. They were halfway to the cellar entrance when the explosion came. The cabin's century-old roof timbers shrieked and groaned as the blast tore through the structure, sending debris raining down around them. Sophia felt Demon's arms wrap around her, shielding her from falling wood as they tumbled into the stone-lined cellar. Above them, boots hit the cabin floor with military precision. Richard's contractors were inside now, moving through the wreckage with professional efficiency. Sophia could hear them calling out room clearances, coordinating their search. Movement in the cellar. Flashbang out. Demon pressed Sophia against the stone wall, covering her with his body as the concussion grenade detonated above them. The confined space amplified the blast, leaving Sophia's ears ringing and her vision blurred. She could taste blood and dust, could feel Demon's weight against her as consciousness wavered. When her hearing returned, the first thing she heard was Richard's voice. "Bring her up, carefully. She's been traumatized enough. The biker? Leave him. He's not our problem anymore." Sophia felt hands grabbing her arms, dragging her toward the cellar stairs despite her struggles. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear Demon trying to get up, could see blood on his face where debris had struck him. "Don't touch her." His voice was weak but determined. She said no. That means no. "The criminal is still conscious," someone reported to Richard. "Then make him unconscious." The rifle butt caught Demon in the temple, dropping him like a stone. Sophia screamed, fighting against the hands that held her, but there were too many of them. They carried her up the stairs and out into the mountain sunlight where Richard waited with the patient expression of a man who'd never doubted the outcome. "Hello, darling," he said, straightening his tie like they were meeting for lunch instead of in the ruins of her bombed cabin. "I've missed you." Looking at his perfectly composed face, Sophia realized something that cut through her despair like a blade. She wasn't afraid anymore. For 2 years, Richard had controlled her through fear. Fear of his anger. Fear of his disapproval. Fear of what he might do if she displeased him. But watching him orchestrate this military assault on her chosen refuge, seeing him hurt someone who'd shown her nothing but respect and protection, Sophia discovered something stronger than fear. Rage. "I left you," she said quietly. "I ended our engagement. I told you I never wanted to see you again. You were confused, emotional. Women often are when they're isolated and under stress." "Women often are," Sophia repeated, her voice growing stronger. "You hear yourself, right? You understand that you sound like a sociopath." Richard's perfect composure cracked slightly. "I've spent 3 weeks worried sick about you. I've hired the best people, spent enormous resources trying to find you and bring you home safely. And this is the gratitude I get? You spent 3 weeks hunting me like an animal because you can't accept that I don't want to be owned by you." "Owned?" Richard looked genuinely confused. "Sophia, I love you. Everything I do is because I love you." "No." Sophia met his eyes without flinching. "Everything you do is because you can't stand losing control. Love doesn't require GPS tracking and private investigators. Love doesn't hire mercenaries to kidnap people. I hired security professionals to rescue you from a dangerous criminal. I hired myself to escape from a dangerous criminal. You." The slap came without warning, Richard's perfectly manicured hand connecting with her cheek in a crack that echoed across the mountain valley. For 2 years, he'd never raised a hand to her. Psychological manipulation had been more effective, more deniable. But faced with her open defiance, his mask had finally slipped completely. "There it is," Sophia said, touching her stinging cheek. The real Richard Blackwood. Was that satisfying? Did it feel good to finally hit the woman who won't do what you want? "You made me do that." Richard's voice carried the petulant anger of a child denied a toy. "If you'd just been reasonable, if you'd just come home like a normal person. If I'd just stayed in my cage like a good little pet. I gave you everything, a beautiful home, financial security, a life most women would kill for. You gave me a prison made of silk and gold, and when I escaped, you hired soldiers to drag me back." Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Sophia could see him calculating, trying to find the manipulation that would restore his control. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer the confused, isolated woman he'd systematically broken down. She'd found her strength in the most unlikely place, in the arms of a wounded Hells Angels President, who'd treated her with more respect in 18 hours than Richard had shown her in 2 years. "Put her in the car," Richard ordered his men. "We're going home." "No?" The word came from the ruins of her cabin, spoken in a voice like gravel and gunpowder. Demon Lawson emerged from the cellar entrance, blood streaming down his face but his weapon steady in his hands. "I said don't touch her." "Kill him," Richard snapped. But before his contractors could move, the mountain valley filled with the thunder of approaching motorcycles. 20 Harley-Davidsons crested the ridge like mechanized cavalry, their riders armed and ready for war. The Montana Hells Angels had arrived, and Richard Blackwood was about to learn the difference between hired loyalty and brotherhood forged in blood. Sophia had never been in the middle of a standoff between private military contractors and outlaw bikers, but she was rapidly learning that superior numbers meant very little when facing men who viewed death as preferable to backing down. The Hells Angels had positioned themselves in a perfect semicircle around Richard's forces, their weapons trained with professional precision, despite their outlaw status. These weren't the mindless criminals that movies portrayed. They moved like soldiers, communicated like tacticians, and radiated the kind of deadly competence that came from surviving in a world where weakness meant death. "Afternoon, Blackwood," called the lead rider, a massive man with graying hair and eyes like winter storms. "Danny Mitchell, Vice President of the Montana Hells Angels. I believe you've been fucking with our brother's woman." "This is a private matter," Richard replied, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining composure while surrounded by armed bikers. "The woman is my fiancée. She's been kidnapped and held against her will." "Funny thing about that," Danny continued conversationally. "She doesn't look kidnapped to me. In fact, she looks like a woman who's finally found someone who treats her right." Sophia stood in the center of the chaos, Richard's contractors on one side and the Hells Angels on the other, and realized that for the first time in her life, she had the power to determine her own fate. Not through running or hiding, but through the simple act of choosing who deserved her loyalty. "I was never your fiancé," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the mountain valley. "I was your prisoner. I broke off our engagement 3 weeks ago, and you refused to accept it. You were confused. I was trapped." Sophia turned to face the Hells Angels, meeting Danny's eyes with steady determination. "This man spent 2 years systematically isolating me, controlling every aspect of my life, making me believe I was lucky to be loved by someone who monitored my every movement. When I finally found the courage to leave, he hired these men to kidnap me and drag me back." "That true, Blackwood?" Danny's voice carried the weight of judgment. "She's not thinking clearly. She's been isolated, probably terrorized by your associate." "Associate." Danny's laugh was cold as mountain wind. "Brother. Demon Lawson is our brother, and in the Hells Angels we protect our family. All of our family." The emphasis was clear. By choosing to help Demon, by standing with him against her abuser, Sophia had been claimed by the most feared motorcycle club in Montana. The implications weren't lost on Richard's contractors. Attacking her now meant war with an organization that had been fighting impossible odds for decades. "Sir," one of the contractors said quietly to Richard, "we should consider tactical withdrawal. This situation has escalated beyond our contract parameters. I'm not leaving without her." "You are leaving," Demon said, appearing beside Sophia despite his injuries. Blood still seeped through his bandages, and she could see the effort it cost him to remain upright. But his presence was as solid and reassuring as the mountains themselves. "The question is whether you're leaving on your bike or in a body bag. You can't threaten me. I have connections, federal agents, politicians, judges. I can make your entire organization disappear." "Maybe." Demon's smile was sharp as broken glass. "But you'll still be dead, so it won't matter much to you." The standoff stretched taut as wire, both sides calculating odds and consequences. Sophia could feel the violence simmering just below the surface, could see fingers tightening on triggers and bodies shifting into combat positions. "Stop," she said suddenly, stepping forward. "Just stop." Every weapon in the clearing swung toward her, and for a moment Sophia felt the weight of 30 armed men hanging on her next words. "Richard, look at yourself. Really look." Sophia's voice carried the authority she'd developed in pediatric emergency rooms, calm and compelling despite the chaos. "You brought a private army to kidnap a woman who told you she didn't want to see you anymore. You hired soldiers to drag me back to a relationship I explicitly ended. Does that sound like love to you? I was protecting you. You were controlling me, just like you controlled everything else. Where I worked, who I talked to, where I went, what I wore. You turned love into surveillance and called it care." Richard's perfectly composed mask was cracking, revealing the desperate need for control that had always lurked beneath his polished exterior. "I gave you everything. You gave me a beautiful cage." Sophia met his eyes without flinching. "And when I found the courage to leave that cage, you decided I wasn't allowed to make that choice. I know what's best for you." "No. You know what's best for your ego. You can't stand the thought of losing something you consider yours." Sophia took a step closer to Demon, feeling his solid presence beside her like an anchor in chaos. "But I was never yours, Richard. I was never anyone's. I'm a person, not a possession. This criminal has brainwashed you. This man treated me like a human being. He asked for my help instead of demanding it. He said please and thank you. He bled on my porch rather than break down my door." Sophia's voice grew stronger with each word. "He showed me what respect looks like. I respected you. You monitored me. You tracked my phone, followed my car, had your people report on my activities. You called that respect?" Richard stared at her for a long moment, and Sophia could see him finally beginning to understand that all his money and connections and hired guns couldn't force her to love him. The realization was devastating to a man who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with sufficient resources. "You'll regret this," he said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "When you're living in some trailer park with a criminal, when you're wondering where your next meal is coming from, you'll remember what you threw away. I'll remember the day I chose freedom over security, love over control." Sophia reached for Demon's hand, intertwining their fingers with simple certainty. "I'll remember the day I learned the difference between being wanted and being owned." Danny Mitchell stepped forward, his massive presence radiating the kind of authority that needed no weapons to be compelling. "Blackwood, you've got 10 minutes to collect your people and get off our mountain. After that, we consider you a hostile presence in our territory. This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Demon's voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Touch her again, come near her again, send people to harass her again, and I'll make sure you disappear somewhere the federal agents can't find you." The threat hung in the mountain air like smoke, and Richard Blackwood finally seemed to understand that his wealth and connections meant nothing to men who'd spent decades operating outside the law. His contractors were already moving toward their vehicles, recognizing a losing proposition when they saw one. "You made a mistake," Richard said to Sophia as his men loaded their equipment. "You chose wrong." "No," Sophia replied, squeezing Demon's hand. "For the first time in my life, I chose right." She watched Richard's convoy disappear down the mountain road, taking with it the last vestiges of her old life. When the engine sounds faded completely, she found herself surrounded by 20 Hells Angels who were looking at her with expressions ranging from respect to curiosity. "So," Danny said finally, "you planning to stick around? Because Demon's gonna need someone to change those bandages." Sophia looked at the ruins of her grandmother's cabin, at the place where she'd hoped to hide from the world and heal from Richard's psychological warfare. The building was destroyed, but something better had been built in its place. She'd found her strength. She'd found her voice, She'd found a man who saw her as a partner instead of a possession. "Yeah," she said, meeting Demon's gray eyes with a smile that felt like sunrise. "I'm sticking around." The Montana Hells Angels erupted in cheers and applause, welcoming their president's woman with the enthusiasm of a family gaining a new member. And standing in the wreckage of her old life, surrounded by the most unlikely protectors imaginable, Sophia Blake finally understood what it felt like to be home. 8 months later, Sophia stood in the garage bay of the Hells Angels compound, watching Demon teach her how to rebuild a carburetor, and marveled at how completely her definition of normal had changed. "The key is patience," he was saying, his hands guiding hers as they worked together to adjust the fuel mixture on his rebuilt shovel head. "You can't rush the process. Everything has to be perfectly balanced or the whole system fails." Sophia smiled at his philosophy. Everything with Demon came back to balance. Balance between strength and gentleness, between leadership and partnership, between protecting what you loved and respecting its independence. Even love, she'd learned, was about balance, supporting each other without consuming each other. The compound had become more than just the headquarters of an outlaw motorcycle club. It was home in ways that Richard's expensive house had never been. Sophia had her own medical clinic in the converted garage bay, treating everything from road rash to gunshot wounds for a community that lived outside conventional healthcare systems. She'd also started a literacy program for the children of club members, creating something positive in a world that most people saw only as dangerous. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen. Dr. Blake. The voice belonged to Maria, age 9, whose father rode with the Nevada chapter. She held up a book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, with pride. "I finished it all by myself." "That's wonderful, Maria." Sophia wiped her hands on a towel and knelt to the girl's level, giving her the same attention she would have given any student. "What was your favorite part?" "When Harry found his family at Hogwarts. Even though they weren't related by blood, they still loved him." Sophia glanced at Demon, who was pretending not to listen while he worked on the carburetor. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. "Are you going to have kids with Mr. Demon?" The question still caught Sophia off guard, even though it came up regularly from the club's children. She and Demon had talked about it, carefully, honestly, both of them aware that bringing children into their world would require thought and planning. "Maybe someday," she said diplomatically. "I hope so. You'd be good parents, and kids need to see that love doesn't have to hurt." The wisdom in those words, coming from a 9-year-old who'd seen too much of the world's darkness, made Sophia's throat tight with emotion. After Maria ran off to find her father, Demon looked up from his work with eyes that held the same feeling. "Kids, huh? Apparently the entire club has opinions about our reproductive choices. What do you think?" Sophia considered the question seriously. Raising children in this world would mean teaching them to navigate complexity, love and danger, loyalty and independence, the difference between violence that protected and violence that destroyed. But it would also mean raising them to understand that strength came in many forms, that family was about choice rather than obligation, that love was about respect rather than control. "I think," she said slowly, "that any child we raise will know the difference between being protected and being controlled. They'll understand that real strength comes from choosing to be gentle when you could be cruel." Demon's smile was soft and warm, transforming his scarred face into something beautiful. Sounds like we're on the same page. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, rebuilt larger and stronger than the original, with bulletproof glass and reinforced walls that could withstand anything Richard Blackwood might send their way, Sophia thought about the price of the choices they'd made. She'd lost her old life completely, had cut ties with everyone who'd known her during the Richard years, but she'd gained something immeasurably more valuable: the knowledge that she was strong enough to choose her own path. brave enough to love without conditions, fierce enough to fight for what mattered. The Hells Angels had embraced her completely, but acceptance had come with expectations. She was the president's old lady, which meant representing the club with dignity, supporting Demon's leadership decisions, and being strong when strength was required. The women of the club, wives and girlfriends who'd carved out space in a traditionally male world, had taught her that love in their community meant being a partner, not a dependent. "Regrets?" Demon asked, reading her mood with the accuracy of a man who'd learned to interpret her silences. "None." Sophia leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and motor oil that had become home to her. "Though I have to admit, when I was hiding in that cabin, I never imagined this would be my life. Good thing you opened the door. Good thing you knocked, instead of breaking it down." Demon's arm tightened around her. "I was raised to respect women, not control them. Difference between being strong and being a bully." They sat in comfortable silence as stars appeared overhead, tiny points of light in the vast Montana sky. In the distance, Sophia could hear the rumble of motorcycles. Brothers returning from runs, from business, from whatever kept the club functioning in a world that would rather see them disappear. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know where you are. This isn't over. R." Sophia showed the message to Demon, who read it with calm interest. "Want me to handle this permanently?" The offer was made casually, but Sophia knew Demon meant it literally. In his world, problems like Richard Blackwood could be solved with finality that left no room for future harassment. "No," as she said, deleting the message. "He can send all the threats he wants. I'm not the same woman who ran away from him." "No, you're not." Sophia Rodriguez Blake. She'd taken both names when they married, keeping her identity while claiming his protection, looked at the message's sender and felt nothing but pity. Richard was still trying to control her through fear, still believing that money and influence could force her to return to his beautiful cage. But Sophia had learned something about herself in that mountain cabin, something she'd discovered in the arms of a wounded Hells Angels president who'd treated her like a partner instead of a possession. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined, strong enough to love a dangerous man, strong enough to build a life outside society's conventional rules, strong enough to be the bridge between worlds that most people thought incompatible, strong enough to choose love over fear, freedom over security, authenticity over facade, and strong enough to create something entirely new from the ashes of everything she'd once accepted as normal. "Demon," she said quietly. "Yeah. Thank you for knocking on my door instead of breaking it down. Thank you for opening it." They went inside together as the Montana night claimed the mountains. Two people who'd found salvation in the most unlikely circumstances. Behind them, their home stood solid and secure, a testament to the truth that the strongest foundations were built on respect rather than control, on choice rather than obligation. And somewhere in the distance, the mountain wind carried the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. One choice at a time, one stand at a time, one act of courage at a time. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and stay for the next ride.